Imagine dying at the exact moment of your greatest triumph. You've just won the most important naval battle in history, saved your nation from invasion, and secured your place among the greatest commanders who ever lived. But you'll never see the celebrations. You'll never know how your sacrifice changed the world. This is the story of Horatio Nelson and the day he broke Napoleon's dreams of conquering Britain. Right. So, let's set the stage. It's the early 1800s, and Napoleon Bonaparte has turned Europe into his personal chessboard. He's won victory after victory on land, forcing Austria to surrender, dominating Prussia, and basically making every continental power either bow down or get steamrolled. But there's one piece on the board: he can't capture Britain. That stubborn little island nation across the channel that simply refuses to acknowledge French supremacy. Why can't Napoleon just march over and take it? Simple. The Royal Navy. Britain's wooden walls, as they were called. The most powerful naval force on the planet, and the one thing standing between Napoleon and total European domination. By 1802, Napoleon had forced so many victories that Britain actually agreed to peace. The Treaty of Amiens promised to return French colonies, evacuate Malta and Egypt, whilst Napoleon would withdraw from Naples and the Papal States. For the first time in a decade, Europe could breathe. The wars were over. Peace had arrived. Except it hadn't. Not really. Napoleon sent another expedition to Haiti to crush a slave revolt and restore French control over the lucrative sugar trade. It failed spectacularly. Holding distant colonies proved nearly impossible, with the Royal Navy prowling the seas like sharks. So in April 1803, Napoleon did something shocking. He sold the entire Louisiana Territory to the United States. Who's like that needed the money, couldn't defend it anyway, so why not? But whilst Napoleon was sorting out colonial disasters, Britain was watching nervously as he tightened his grip on Switzerland and refused to budge from Italy. Meanwhile, the French were demanding Britain leave Malta, which the British had precisely zero intention of doing. Trust was dead, peace was a charade, and Napoleon started gathering troops at Boulogne, clearly preparing to invade Britain. Britain declared war in May 1803, kicking off what would become known as the War of the Third Coalition. Napoleon wasn't quite ready. His fleet was scattered across various harbors. 21 ships in Brest, 12 in Toulon, 9 more in the Atlantic. The superior British Navy immediately blockaded the main ports, bottling up the French fleet before they could unite. Now, Napoleon was a genius on land, but naval warfare that required different thinking. He developed a plan in the summer of 1804. One French fleet would break the blockade, escape to open water, then attack the British forces, blockading another harbor. This would free that portion of the French fleet, allowing them to unite. With combined strength, they could control the English Channel long enough to ferry his army across. Brilliant in theory. Execution, well, that's another story. Things got interesting in October 1804 when Britain sank some Spanish vessels. Spain, rightfully miffed, declared war on Britain and allied with France in December. Suddenly, Napoleon had the numbers to make his plan work. In late March 1805, Vice-Admiral Pierre-Charles Villeneuve commanded the French fleet at Toulon. He managed to slip past the loose blockade maintained by Vice-Admiral Horatio Nelson. Now, Nelson was convinced Napoleon intended to land forces in Italy, so he'd positioned most of his ships around Sardinia. Classic misdirection whilst Nelson was looking the wrong way. Villeneuve was implementing Napoleon's plan. Villeneuve passed through the Straits of Gibraltar in early April, picked up Spanish reinforcements, and headed straight for the Caribbean. Nelson didn't receive intelligence about this until late April. By then, Villeneuve had a massive head start. What followed was an epic chase across the Atlantic Ocean. Villeneuve reached the Caribbean in May, capturing a few British outposts. Nelson arrived in June, still one step behind. But despite being in the Caribbean, Villeneuve couldn't inflict much damage on British colonies. The local defenses held firm, so he turned around and headed back to Europe, arriving in Vice-Admiral Calder, commanding a smaller British fleet, was ordered to intercept Villeneuve. Near Cape Finisterre, they fought an indecisive battle that prevented Villeneuve from reaching Brest to lift the blockade. With nowhere else to go, the French fleet limped into Cadiz. Meanwhile, Austria and Russia joined the Third Coalition against France. Napoleon had to march his army from Boulogne eastward to face this new threat. The invasion of Britain postponed indefinitely. All that planning, all that maneuvering, shelved because continental Europe demanded attention. Nelson was appointed overall commander of the Royal Navy. As the combined French-Spanish fleet concentrated in Cadiz, he sent most of his vessels to blockade them. By the end of September, he joined the fleet personally aboard his flagship HMS Victory. Napoleon ordered Villeneuve to move towards Italy. Villeneuve ignored it. Then on the 18th of October, Napoleon sent a new order to stay in Cadiz and wait for a replacement. Basically, you're sacked, but don't move until your replacement arrives. Humiliating, that Villeneuve, pride wounded, ignored this order too. On the 20th of October, the Allied fleet went to sea. By the 21st, they were approaching the Straits of Gibraltar. Nelson deliberately allowed them to move away from Cadiz if battle came. He wanted them too far from harbor to retreat. At dawn on the 21st of October 1805, the French spotted British vessels. Villeneuve hadn't expected Nelson's navy to be so strong. Panicking slightly, he ordered his ships back to harbor. But his crews lacked proper training, and this maneuver failed spectacularly. The Allied fleet ended up in an incoherent, disorganized line. Now, traditional naval tactics of the era were straightforward: approach the enemy in parallel lines and blast away until someone surrenders or sinks. Ship quality, crew training, and luck determined the victor. Predictable, safe, boring. Nelson had other ideas. He divided his fleet into 2 squadrons to attack the Allied line broadside. He personally led the northern group of 13 ships, HMS Victory at the front. Vice Admiral Collingwood commanded the southern squadron of 14 ships, led by HMS Royal Sovereign. By midday, only 5 kilometers separated the 2 navies. They were off Cape Trafalgar. Nelson issued his famous signal. England expects that every man will do his duty. Gives you chills, doesn't it? Royal Sovereign had recently been repaired and was faster than most ships. The wind pushed it dangerously close to the enemy line whilst other vessels lagged behind. At 12:20, Royal Sovereign fired the first shots at Santa Ana and Fugo. They immediately returned fire. Collingwood's flagship found itself attacked by 4 enemy ships simultaneously. 15 minutes later, Belle-Île arrived and covered Royal Sovereign's right side. More English vessels moved into the fray, attempting to cut the Allied line. Collingwood was outnumbered at the initial point of contact. But here is the thing: the Allied fleet's positioning was so poor that their second-line ships could unassist. By 14 o'clock, most of the first-line vessels had either sunk or surrendered. To the north, Nelson's squadron reached the enemy line around 12:20. But the wind was dying. His ships became slow-moving targets. His refusal to fight using traditional tactics proved detrimental. At this moment, none of his ships could fire whilst the enemy sent volley after volley into them. Casualties mounted. But Victory kept moving forward. Nelson ordered a fake maneuver, making the enemy think his ships would form a traditional line. Then he suddenly turned, and Victory ended up positioned between the French flagship Bucentaure and the smaller Reed. This allowed Nelson's ship to use guns on both sides. Genius positioning. Victory's broadsides hammered Bucentaure, taking it out of the fight. But Victory itself was taking massive damage from Reed. The French were using sharpshooters positioned in the rigging. At 13:15, one of their shots struck Nelson. The musket ball entered his left shoulder, passed through his spine, and lodged in his back. It was immediately clear this wound was fatal. Nelson was carried below deck, conscious but dying. Above him, the battle raged on. Redoubtable's crew attempted to board Victory, but British sailors repelled them. Victory was soon reinforced by Téméraire, which positioned itself across Redoutable's left side and opened fire. By 14:20, Redoutable surrendered to Téméraire's crew. Further north, HMS Neptune engaged the Spanish Santissima Trinidad and knocked it out of the fight. By 14 o'clock, Villeneuve realized he was losing and ordered the northern portion of his line to move southwest and collapse on the British fleet. But his captains failed to see the signal. This became the final mistake of the Allied fleet. Villeneuve's Bucentaure was in no condition to continue fighting. He surrendered. By the time the remaining 10 Allied ships started moving to assist, most vessels in the center had either sunk or been captured. Collingwood took overall command of the British Navy and ordered Nelson's squadron to intercept French reinforcements. The remaining Allied ships decided discretion was the better part of valor and retreated. Complete British victory. 18 enemy ships captured, but the price. Nelson, the greatest naval commander Britain had ever produced, lay dying below deck on HMS Victory. As news of the victory reached him, Nelson passed away. His final words were reportedly, "Thank God I have done my duty." He'd won the most decisive naval battle of the age, secured British naval supremacy for a century, and ensured Napoleon could never invade Britain. But he'd never see the celebrations, never witness the impact of his sacrifice. The French defeat at Trafalgar confirmed British naval dominance and meant Napoleon would never be able to invade Britain. But whilst this battle raged at sea, Napoleon's Grand Army was already moving into Germany against Austrian and Russian forces, heading towards his greatest land victory at Austerlitz. Trafalgar changed everything. It established Britain as the undisputed master of the seas for the next 100 years. It ended any realistic hope Napoleon had of invading Britain. It ensured that no matter how many battles Napoleon won on land, he could never truly defeat Britain. The island fortress remained bankrolling coalition after coalition against French dominance, until finally, 10 years later at Waterloo, Napoleon's luck ran out. Nelson became a legend and national hero whose death in the moment of victory made him immortal in British consciousness. His tactics at Trafalgar revolutionized naval warfare. His courage and leadership set standards that British naval officers would aspire to for generations. This battle proved that innovative tactics could overcome superior numbers, that leadership and morale mattered as much as firepower, that sometimes the greatest victories require the greatest sacrifices. On that October day in 1805, off the Spanish coast near Cape Horatio Nelson broke Napoleon's dreams of empire, secured Britain's future as a global superpower, and died knowing he'd done his duty. Not a bad legacy. That if you're fascinated by these incredible moments that shaped history, smash that like button. Subscribe for more epic historical tales where courage, strategy, and sacrifice changed the world. Drop a comment, what other naval battles should I cover? I'll catch you in the next one. And remember, sometimes doing your duty means everything.